Our guest today can tell you a thing or two about Killer Instinct. He certainly had it in his career. It's none other than Jeremy Roenick, of course, from the Snipes and Stripes podcast. JR, thanks so much for doing this. Killer Instinct, do you think it's a real thing in this league?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it differentiates the winners from the losers. There is no question that the guys who are more successful have a bite and a different edge than the guys that aren't as successful. There's got to be a burning passion in your stomach to want to win, to want to compete. It takes that burning passion to be able to get into the corners, take hits, make hits, and do the things that it takes to win. There's no question. I've seen players that are as talented as anybody, but for some reason don't have that edge or don't have that burn in their gut to do the little things it does take to be successful, and they don't make it when they should be stars.
JR, what do you attribute the Toronto Maple Leafs? I mean, they've had solid teams in the past. You can pick them apart with goaltending or defense and whatnot, but what do you think it is about that specific franchise that just hasn't been able to get over the hump?
Well, being one of those guys who put them into that slump back in 2004 for a long time, I enjoyed watching them stay in that slump for a long time. But I do have to say I am a big fan of Toronto. I'm a big fan of the area, the fans of the team. I'm a big Auston Matthews fan. So take away my professional part of it that I've been in for a long time. As a fan, as a guy looking out from the outside, the frustration for me is immense. I can't imagine what it's like in Toronto world. I know it's crazy. I have a lot of friends up there, so I hear it a lot. And it seems to be a pattern, right? And I think it's a lot that comes with pressure of being in probably one of the biggest hockey markets. The pressure can get to them. The media is on them 100%. It's in their face 24/7. And when they get in these games, it's instead of having that killer instinct, I think the mentality comes in like, oh no, what if we lose this again? What if this happens again? What if? And I don't know if it's a generational thing, that it's the kids today and how they approach games, how they think, how they prepare, what they worry about, what they fear. Because you can't tell me that Auston Matthews doesn't want to win. You can't tell me that John Tavares doesn't want to win. They do. But it's what goes into their heads. What is in their heads before a game, during a game? Is it positive? Is it negative? I can't get into their heads, but it seems to be a recurring problem. And when you don't prepare for games like you did the other day against Chicago Blackhawks, and you lose 2 points that are very valuable. I know it's the beginning of the season, and that you can slap that under the rug, but you do that a few times and you lose to the teams that you should be beating relatively easy. I mean, obviously you do. Yes. I thought you made a great point earlier about there is an NHL team over there. There is another pro team over there. There are players that are very good, that are working hard, but that's a game that Toronto should win. No question.
Are you saying the generation today is soft, JR?
Without question. Are you kidding me? By leaps and bounds soft. They do have there are guys in the league that are tougher, that are tough, that are mentally tough, that are physically tough, that we say are 80s and 90s type players, but 98, 99% of them, you yell at them, they climb underneath the table and hide rather than standing up on the table and pounding their chest and fighting back, unfortunately. But I think the NHL has kind of, I mean, obviously society has created that, but the NHL has also created that with a lot of rule changes and a lot of mentality that they try to protect players. So some of it's their fault, some of it's not.
Bottom line, we're trying to figure out why the Leafs keep losing the shit teams. With all due respect to Chicago, I know Connor Bedard's on that team, but I wanted to ask you, as somebody who rolled into this market, had some success, obviously playing against the Maple Leafs in your career, is there a different feel when a player comes into then the Air Canada Centre, now Scotiabank Arena, when they play? They always get up for those games?
100%. There's no question. Playing in that arena, that was my favorite place to play, Maple Leaf Gardens, going up to Toronto. Going into Montreal Forum back in the day, you get up for those games. There is no question about it. The energy is different. You're playing in front of people that know exactly what they're watching. They all have opinions. They are huge hockey fans. You know that the media is going to be watching you. It's going to be on television. There's a different feel when you play in that building, which also is another problem for Toronto. It's another hurdle that they have to deal with. There's no off nights. There's no off nights for Toronto. It's because they play for the Maple Leafs. And when you don't prepare mentally to play some of these teams that are going to come in and there's no pressure on them, like the Chicago Blackhawks just did, just ran them out of the building. And to me, it's going to be really interesting to see how Toronto responds to that. Because if you don't get pissed off of losing that game and come back with vengeance and have a great game next, you got to wonder about the size of their care. How big is their care? Because that becomes an issue, and I don't like to see that happen because it does happen. I mean, it almost happened against Montreal in Game 1. They battled back, which I thought was pretty gutsy. But they shouldn't have been in that situation in the first place. And again, they lost 2 points that they should have won against Chicago.
And within that, do you think the leadership comes into play? I mean, you played for 20 years in this league. You've been the leader. You've also been the young guy looking up at players. Is that a big thing within the locker room that you attribute that character? Does it start from the top of the leadership group within that team?
Well, I don't know how leaders deal with their teams nowadays anyway. I don't know whether they are vocal leaders, whether they're just whether they just go out there and lead by example, whether they're afraid of yelling and screaming and offending one of their teammates or calling one of their teammates out. I know back in the 90s, and I had Dirk Graham, I had Keith Tkachuk, I had Chris Chelios. They had no problem standing up in the middle of the room and absolutely reaming you a new one and screaming and calling you out in front of your teammates. And they didn't care what you thought or your feelings. I think feelings are a big part of players today. I think they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. I think they don't want to alienate somebody. I think they feel bad for them. So I don't know what the leadership is like in that room. I don't know who the verbal communicator is. If there's a loud communicator, if there's a logical, soft communicator. I always performed better when somebody yelled at me and somebody challenged me. Is somebody challenging them in the locker room? Do they just look for the person next to them to do it, passing the buck? I don't know what that question is or that answer is. You'd have to ask them in there. But I would think with a guy like Ryan Reeves on this team, a guy who is a big, tough, strong guy who is very confident, that can't stand up and be a vocal, I think, cheerleader in that locker room, or some guy who's not afraid to call somebody out and make people accountable. They need that. And I think teams need that. And if you don't have that, who's going to make you accountable?
Exactly. And we were saying this last spring too, that I think accountability is such a big word for this team. And I'm happy they brought in some of these guys. But what's your read on this Maple Leafs roster? Do you like the look of it? What do you think they need to add? Do you think this team is capable of winning this season?
100%. I actually picked Toronto to go to the Stanley Cup at start of the season. I believe that they added some grit. They added some tenacity. I love having a Max Domi there. I think Max could have a very good season if his head is in the right place. I've always loved Bertuzzi. Has a good grind, and he has a good aspect in front of the net, can score goals. And what I said about Ryan Reeves is important. No, he's not going to be big for you on as points go or as minutes go, but he's a force, physical force on the ice, which could make Matthews, Tavares, Max Domi play a bigger stature, a little bit more maybe risque factor, knowing that there's a guy like that policing, watching them. Like I said in the locker room, I like what they've done, but can they get it done? I mean, I think they can, but when I see the game against Chicago, I'm like, same old team, and that frustrates me.
Yeah, same here. You touched on a little bit with Reeves there, JR. I've got a theory right now that I haven't had in a long time, and I feel like the league is starting to recognize, and the powers that be are starting to recognize the different levels of a team and the lines and the importance of, say, a fourth line, an energy line, a checking line, a toughness line. They seem to have gone away from that in the last, take your pick on how long. Do you see that coming back at all? I mean, fights are up. I feel like hits are up. Maybe I'm just following the right accounts on Instagram, but I feel like they're starting to value that energy line a little bit more than they have in the past 6 or so years.
Well, just look at the teams that have won the Stanley Cup in the last 5 years. What has been the common denominator of each one of those? There's two. There's good goaltending, and it's a great fourth line. The fourth line for the Vegas Golden Knights last year was by far the best fourth line in the league and played like it. And they contributed every single game, whether it was defensively or offensively or both. It's an integral part of a team and should not be looked down upon. And some of these teams, like Tampa right now has no fourth line, and I believe Tampa's on their way down. Vegas has the best fourth line. They're the champions right now. And if Toronto wants to win the Stanley Cup, they're going to need a big fourth line and even a stronger third line, to tell you the truth.
You reference Auston Matthews off to an impeccable start once again. I thought he had his 7th the other night. They called it back. But where does he rank in terms of all-time Americans to you? And what does he need to do to be the top of all time?
He's going to be the best American goal scorer of all time. There's absolutely zero question about that. He will pass Mike Modano in goals, in my opinion. As an entire hockey player, he is definitely going to go in as one of the top 3 best players. I mean, Mike Modano to me is the creme de la creme. Patrick Kane is going to be up there. Auston Matthews is going to go down as the best goal scorer in the history of America. There is not a question about it, in my opinion.
JR, we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves. First things first, we haven't touched on how's the golf game right now, and where are you playing at mostly?
Very good, very good. I played 36 yesterday. I shot 71 with a bogey and a double coming in. 17, 18, shot 71, so I had it going. Game is strong, game is good, and I live in San Diego, so I can play year round. It doesn't usually fade too much.
Living the life, love that. I wanted to ask as well. You referenced it earlier on May 4th, 2004. 7:39 in OT. A goal just ripped my heart out. I'm 34. I remember it still vividly. What do you remember about that goal and that night, JR?
Everything, absolutely everything. Everything that I thought about, everything about in between periods. I actually tell the story that I actually sat in my locker in between third period and overtime, and literally went through my head different scenarios. And one of the scenarios I went through was a 2-on-1 and what I was going to do against Eddie, and it just came to fruition exactly like I saw it in my head, which is why I preach to a lot of these kids visualization, right? And seeing things before they happen. It was my favorite goal I've ever scored. There's no question, against one of my favorite rivals. Killing the hearts of Toronto Maple Leaf fans for me was always awesome. Even though I love Toronto Maple Leaf fans, we have that love-hate, respect, I think, relationship that I've valued for years and years and years and still value today.
20 years later, still feeling it. Lastly, tell us about Snipes and Stripes.
Yeah, it's a great show. We just started it on nofilter.net. It's Wednesdays, every Wednesday at 7 Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And just a nice little twist that I put in is my co-host is Tim Peel, the ex-NHL referee who has so much respect over his counterparts in the NHL, in the referee world, but also in the player world. He gives a great perspective of the game from the Stripes aspect, and obviously a lot of goals on my aspect was the Snipes part of the name. So it's Snipes and Stripes every Wednesday at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern, and it's actually fun because we bring a lot of the fans on the show with us, so we can get their take, and sometimes it leads to some pretty good content.